Green is best. That's what we know. Green is strongest. Green is life, and life is pain. I remember the moment I first became aware. Not birth. Orcs aren't born. We crawl out of the ground, out of spores and fungus and the stink of war itself. My first thought wasn't a word. It was hunger. A gnawing, tearing hunger that pushed me to fight before I even knew how to speak. I bit and clawed at the smaller ones that had sprouted beside me in the fungal cradle. 3 died before my body was fully grown. Their meat was my first meal. Their screams were my first joy. The fungal fields lay at the edge of the warband's camp, a sprawling mess of tents, scrap shacks, and ramshackle vehicles stretching as far as my new eyes could see. Smoke thick in the air, unwashed bodies, oil, burning meat, sweet rot of fungus. It was perfect. It was home. I had no name. Names are earned, not given. I was just another boy, another lump of meat for the war machine, another fist for the endless fight. We smaller ones gathered in packs, hiding in numbers while looking for chances to prove we were tougher than the others. The weak were culled quickly. The strong grew stronger by eating them. That is our way. It has always been our way. My first real challenge came when a bigger orc, one who'd been stomping around maybe a week longer than me, decided I was getting too confident. The others called him Gurwa because he liked to go for the throat. He charged me while I was gnawing on a bone, hoping to catch me off guard. But I'd been watching him for days, studying how he moved. I knew his type. I dropped the bone and met his charge head-on, slamming my forehead into his nose with everything I had. The crunch of his cartilage breaking was like music. Gurwa howled and staggered back, green blood pouring down his face. But he was bigger, and anger only makes an orc meaner. He came at me again, slower this time, more careful. We circled, the other boys forming a ring around us, hooting and jeering, placing bets on which of us would be dinner. He feinted left and lunged right, jaws gaping for my throat. I twisted away, but not fast enough. His teeth sank into my shoulder, tearing through thin muscle and tough green hide. Pain exploded through me. Sharp, hot, clarifying. Something changed in that moment. The pain didn't weaken me. It sharpened me. It turned everything else to noise. There was only Gurwa and me, and one of us wasn't going to see the next sunrise. I drove my knee into his gut, forcing him to release his bite. Then I went mad. No thought, no plan, just instinct and rage. My fists smashed into his face again and again until his features were nothing but pulp and broken teeth. Even when he stopped moving, I didn't stop hitting him. I tore and pounded until someone bigger hauled me off. It was a knob, one of the bosses. His skin was a darker, older green, his body wrapped in crude metal plates and scars. He looked down at what was left of Gurwa, then at me, and grunted something that might have been approval. "You fight good, runt," he rumbled, voice like grinding rocks. "But you waste good meat." He was right. In my frenzy, I'd smashed Gurwa so badly there wasn't much left worth eating. Wasteful. Stupid. I lowered my eyes, expecting a beating. Instead, the knob tossed something at my feet. A crude club. Just a length of metal with a leather-wrapped grip. "You grub skull now," the knob declared. "You eat last tonight for wasting meat. Tomorrow you join raid." And that was how I was named. Grub Skull. Not for some great victory or legendary kill, but for beating an enemy into useless mush. It wasn't a name to inspire fear, but it was mine. It meant I was more than just another boy. That night, like the knob had said, I ate last. The choicest cuts were long gone by the time I reached the fire. I got gristle and half-burned fat, but it was enough. I'd lived through my first real fight. I had a name. I had a weapon. Tomorrow I would go on a raid. Tomorrow my life would really start. Sleep came in short, restless bursts. My new club clutched to my chest. Around me, the war band roared and crashed through the night. Fights broke out. Laughter and screams blended with the clatter of tools on metal as weapons were patched up or made meaner. The smell of smoke and cooked meat never faded. That chaos was our lullaby. I dreamed of battle, of glory, of growing bigger and stronger with every enemy I killed. I imagined myself a nob one day, maybe even strong enough to challenge the war boss. Proper orky dreams. But under those dreams, something else moved. A feeling I couldn't name. Like there was a purpose to me that wasn't just smashing and killing. A direction, a calling I couldn't quite understand. Morning came in a roar of engines and the bellowing of knobs gathering their mobs. I jumped up, eager to prove myself. My shoulder throbbed where Gurwa had bitten me, but the wound was already closing. We heal fast, we orcs. As long as you don't die outright, you come back stronger. The knob who named me, I learned his name was Skrea, called his boys together. Around 30 of us, all different sizes and scars. Some had scrap armor of beaten metal and leather. Others, like me, wore nothing but tough green hide. Everyone had something to swing. Clubs, axes, a few battered guns for the lucky ones. Skrea was a sight in the morning light. Nearly twice my height, his body a map of old wounds, bone and metal where meat had failed. One tusk broken and filed to a wicked point. His right eye was cloudy and dead, yet he moved with the easy grace of a predator. His weapon was a massive cleaver that might once have been part of some Imperial machine. Now it was just a tool for making corpses. "Listen up, runts," Skrea growled, his good eye sweeping over us with bored contempt. "Today we hit Hume Farm, small place, few guards, easy meat, easy loot, but any boy who runs, I kill him. Any boy who gets in my way, I kill him. Any boy who grabs loot before I say, I kill him. Understand?" We all grunted or nodded. The rules were simple. Skrea was boss. We followed. We fought. Maybe we lived long enough to do it again. Those who didn't obey died, and their gear went to whoever was fast enough to grab it. It was the way it had always been. We piled into a battle wagon, a huge rattling beast of a machine held together more by belief than by bolts. Its sides were layered in scavenged metal, with crude spikes jutting out at odd angles. The driver, a particularly loud orc with goggles strapped over his eyes, revved the engine over and over, coughing out black smoke that sent squigs scrambling. As we lurched into motion, I ended up wedged between two bigger boys. One called himself Zit. He'd been on a few raids already and claimed he'd killed 10 Humies in one fight. The count went up every time he told the story. The other, Crunch, said nothing, just stared ahead with a focus that was unnerving even for an orc. The ride was miserable. The wagon had no suspension. Every bump in the wasteland sent us crashing into one another. Fights broke out as a matter of course, and Skrea put them down with quick, vicious blows. By the time we crested a ridge and our target came into view, 2 boys had broken arms and one lay unconscious in a corner, blood leaking from his ears. The Hume settlement was exactly what Skrea had promised. Small, isolated, vulnerable. Fields of crops stretched out in neat rows toward a distant tree line. A handful of buildings clustered at the center, one larger than the rest. Storage shed, maybe a hall. From the ridge, I could see tiny figures moving about, unaware of the green tide about to fall on them. Skrea lifted his cleaver. "No shootin' unless I say," he barked. "Too noisy. We get close first. When I give signal, we charge. Kill everything that moves. Burn what don't fit on wagon. Got it?" We signaled our understanding. The battle wagon was parked for a quick getaway once the raid was done. We disembarked and slipped down the ridge, using the sparse scrub for cover. My heart pounded. Not from fear, but from the thrill of it. This would be my first real fight against enemies, not just other orcs. The first true test of my worth. As we crept closer, I saw more details. The Humies were busy in their fields, working with simple tools. Maybe 20 of them in sight, mostly adults, a few smaller ones. I saw no weapons, but Humies are sneaky. Guns could be hidden in any of those buildings. We reached the edge of the crops, still unseen. Scryer raised his cleaver again, then swung it down in a brutal arc. That was the signal. We exploded from cover, a roaring wave of green muscle and crude iron, bellowing our war cries. The humans looked up, confusion twisting into terror in an instant. Some tried to flee toward the buildings, others froze, as if their minds refused to accept what they were seeing. A few, braver or stupider than the rest, raised farming tools like weapons. I charged straight toward one of those fools, a male Hume who planted his feet and thrust a long-handled tool at me like a spear. The metal tip scratched my chest, stinging but barely slowing me. I swung my club and smashed it into his side. I felt ribs crack under the blow. He crumpled, gasping. I stood over him, raised my club, and brought it down on his skull. Killing a Hume was different from killing another orc. This wasn't a rival. This was prey. The satisfaction wasn't in the challenge, it was in the hunt. I roared my triumph and turned to find another target. All around me, the boys were doing the same. Humans fell like wheat before a scythe. Some fought back surprisingly well, managing to wound or even kill a few of the smaller or careless boys. But they never had a chance. We crushed them with sheer numbers and brutality. Scryer was a walking disaster, his cleaver rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. Every swing took another life. He moved with purpose, carving a path toward the largest building, cutting down anyone who tried to bar his way. I followed in his wake, finishing off wounded Humes who still twitched. One grabbed my ankle as I passed. A female, blood bubbling from her mouth, yet her eyes burned with stubborn defiance. I respected that in my own way, so I made her end quick. One clean strike. More mercy than most orcs would bother with. We reached the big building, which turned out to be a storage shed. Inside were sacks of grain, preserved food, tools. Scryer barked orders, sending half the boys to grab whatever they could carry. The rest of us pushed on to clear the remaining structures, hunting any Humes still hiding. I came to a small hut set apart from the others. 4 walls, a roof, 1 door, 1 window. The door was barred from the inside. I heard movement, whispered voices trying to be quiet. I grinned. More prey. With a roar, I slammed my shoulder into the door. It shuddered but held. I backed up and hit it again, harder. Wood splintered. On the 3rd charge, the bar broke, and I stumbled into the dim room. 3 humans huddled in the far corner, a grown female and 2 small ones, all pale-skinned with light hair. The adult pushed the younger behind her and raised a small blade, hand shaking but eyes hard. "Stay back, monster," she said in the human tongue. I understood her. I don't know how. Maybe we're born knowing the enemy's speech the same way we're born knowing how to fight. I advanced slowly, savoring it. She stabbed at me. A clumsy thrust I easily dodged. I could have killed her with 1 swing, but something made me wait. Not mercy. Orcs don't have that. Curiosity. I wanted to see how far she'd go to protect her runts. The answer came quick. She lunged with sudden speed, her knife slipping past my guard and into the muscle of my thigh. Pain flared hot. I roared and smashed her with my club, catching her shoulder and knocking her down. She hit the floor, groaning, but dragged herself back up and stood in front of the little ones again. "Run!" she shouted over her pain. "Run now!" The young ones bolted for the door. I moved to intercept, but the female hurled herself at me again, this time aiming for my eyes. Her determination was impressive. Stupid, but impressive. I caught her by the throat and lifted her off the ground. She kicked and clawed, knife scraping uselessly at my arm. The young ones reached the doorway. They wouldn't get far. Some other boy would find them soon enough. I stared into the female's eyes as her struggles weakened. There was no fear there now, only hatred and something else. A strange calm, acceptance, as if she'd already made her peace because she'd done all she could for her spawn. That unfamiliar look decided it for me. I snapped her neck quickly, giving her a clean death. It felt right. A nod to her spirit, even if she was just a Humi. Outside, one of the young ones already lay dead in the dirt, Zit standing over the small body with a bloody axe. The other was sprinting toward the fields, legs pumping desperately. I started after the survivor. Then Skrayer's roar tore across the settlement. "Back to wagon, now!" The recall signal. Every orc knew to obey at once. I turned away from the fleeing child and joined the stream of boys heading back to the battle wagon, many weighed down with loot. As I walked, I checked the wound in my leg. Not deep. Already clotting. The blade had been small, and the Humi female hadn't been strong. But she'd still managed to hurt me. A lesson? Never underestimate prey, no matter how weak they look. Back at the wagon, Skrayer was counting heads and eyeing the haul. 4 boys dead. Their bodies left where they fell. Orcs don't collect their dead. There's no need. Their spores will seed new orcs in that soil. The cycle continues. The raid had been a success. Food, tools, a few weapons. But Skrayer's scowl was deeper than usual. "Too many dead," he growled. "Humies shouldn't kill any of us. You lot fight like grots." He jabbed his cleaver toward a boy clutching a human gun. "You." I said, "No shootin'. You shot anyway." The boy stared down at the weapon as if surprised he was holding it. "Got it from dead Humi," he protested. "Didn't shoot. Just took gun." Skrayer's answer was simple. His cleaver split the boy from shoulder to gut. The two halves fell apart, blood and organs spilling into the dirt. "Grubskull!" Skrayer barked, pointing the bloody cleaver at me. "Take gun. You earned it today." I stepped forward carefully, keeping my eyes lowered in respect, and pried the laser gun from the corpse's hands. Standard Imperial make. Nothing special to Humies, but to a boy like me, it was a big step up from a club. I held it awkwardly, still learning its weight, but pride warmed my chest. The ride back to camp was quieter than the trip out. We were tired, fed, and pleased with ourselves. A few small fights flared over bits of loot and were settled the usual way, with fists, headbutts, and broken teeth. I kept to myself, turning the laser gun over in my hands and replaying the raid in my head. The human female's eyes stayed with me. Not with guilt, orcs don't feel guilt, but with a question I couldn't quite shape. She'd fought for something other than herself, for the little ones. She'd thrown away her life for theirs without hesitation. That wasn't the orc way. We fight for the joy of it, for the strength we gain, for the status and the loot, not for others. Never for others. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I'd seen in that tiny hut meant something. That her willingness to die for her spawn was important somehow, even if I didn't understand why, even if it was a Humi thing. We reached camp as the sun was going down, long shadows stretching over the jumble of shacks, tents, and clanking vehicles. Skrayer barked orders for the loot to be taken straight to the war boss's tent for sorting. Food would go to the communal pits, weapons and tools to the mechs for poking, prodding, and making more killy. I started to follow the others, but a huge hand landed on my shoulder and held me in place. "You fought good today, Grubskull," Skrayer rumbled, his voice a little less like grinding stone than usual. "Not scared. Used your head, not just your fists. That's good. Rare and new boy." I straightened up, chest swelling with pride. Praise from a knob was rare and worth more than any scrap of loot. "Thank you, boss," I said, using the title he was due. He nodded at the laser gun slung across my back. "Learn to use that proper. Could be useful, could get you killed. Gun jams. Runs out of charge. Enemy still coming. Always have backup." His hand dropped to the massive cleaver at his side. Cold steel never fails. It was more than I'd ever heard him say to any boy. Almost instruction, guidance. Among orcs, most lessons came from getting something broken, bones, teeth, or both. "I understand, boss," I replied. "I'll practice. I'll be ready for next raid." Skrayer grunted, apparently satisfied. "Go eat, rest. Tomorrow we raid again. Different target, harder fight, better loot." Then he stomped off, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my new weapon. I headed for the cooking pits. The day's kills were already roasting, fat hissing in the flames, the rich smell of meat hitting me like a punch to the gut. My stomach growled, reminding me I'd earned my place near the fire today. I wouldn't be eating the scraps this time. Zit and Crunch were already there, tearing chunks off a shared haunch. Zit waved me over with greasy fingers. "Grubskull got gun," he said as I sat beside him, eyes lingering on the laser gun. "Good raid for you." I took a slab of meat from one of the smaller orcs, tending the fire, and nodded. "Good raid for all. Saw you with the small Humie. You killed quick." Zit grinned, bits of meat stuck between his teeth. "Easy kill, no challenge, like stepping on bug." "You kill any that mattered?" "One did," I said. "Had a knife, got me in the leg." I jabbed a thumb at the wound on my thigh, now little more than an angry red line. "Didn't stop her dying." Zit laughed. "Humie hurt you? You getting soft, Grubskull?" The jab pricked at my temper, but I kept it leashed. Zit was probing, looking for weakness, for a reason to push things into a fight. We'd already done our proving today. "Not soft," I said calmly. "Smart. Learn from enemy. Next time I kill faster." Zit looked faintly disappointed by my restraint, but he let it drop. Crunch, as usual, said nothing at all, just chewed and stared into the flames. Most orcs loved to brag, argue, and pick fights almost as much as they loved actual killing. Crunch's silence made him stand out, and anything that stood out in orc society was either very strong or very dead sooner or later. I hadn't decided which he would be. As night settled in, the camp changed its rhythm. Fires burned brighter, casting wild, twitching shadows over scrap walls and armored hides. Music, if you could call it that, throbbed through the air, crude drums rattling metal, someone pounding on an engine block in time with their own heartbeat. Orcs with no formal role as musicians simply hit, blew, or smashed whatever seemed right, and somehow it all merged into a raw, primal rhythm that felt like it came from the bones of the world. Some of the boys started to dance, if you could call it that. Stomping, shoving, imitations of combat that let them bleed off extra aggression without actually killing anyone. Others wrestled, arm wrestled, or hurled rocks to see who could throw the farthest. A few, exhausted from the raid, found quiet places to sleep or sat down to sharpen blades and hammer dents out of armor. I joined the last group, finding a smaller fire where I could properly inspect my laser gun. I stripped it down as best I could, learning its workings by trial and error. It was simpler than I'd expected. A power cell fed energy into focusing lenses and emitters, turning it into a beam that could burn through flesh and lighter materials. The charge indicator on the side showed roughly half a load left. Not enough for a long fight, but enough for practice and emergencies. I'd need new power cells, or a way to recharge this one, if I wanted to rely on it in future raids. As I snapped the last part back into place, I felt eyes on me. A mech was watching from just beyond the firelight. Mechs were different. They had a knack for machines the rest of us didn't. Where most orcs saw shooty bit and hitting bit, they saw possibilities. This one was medium-sized, covered in tools and mechanical junk bolted into his skin and armor. Gears spun on his shoulder plate for no reason except that they could. "New shooter you got there, boy?" he asked, his voice carrying that strange mech twang. "Want to make it more killy?" I hesitated. Mech work could make a weapon deadlier, but also more unpredictable. And I remembered Scryer's warning about guns failing at the worst time. "What would you do to it?" I asked. The mech's grin flashed, metal teeth glinting. "Could make beam hotter, more burny. Could stick big stabby on the end for when charge runs out. Could make it louder, scarier, make Humies soil themselves before they die. All tempting, all risky. What's the cost?" I asked. Nothing came free in orc life, not even improvements. 2 teeth, he said, meaning tusks. Solid, proper currency among our kind. Fair price, but I didn't have any spare. I was too new. I hadn't lost any of my own yet, and I hadn't collected trophies from enough foes. No teeth yet, I admitted. After next raid, maybe. The mech nodded, unsurprised. Come find Nazgrim when you got teeth. I make your shooter a proper Orky gun. He wandered off, hunting for richer customers. I finished putting the laser gun back together and set it within easy reach. Then I leaned against a chunk of rock and stared into the fire, letting my thoughts drift back over the raid. The burning fields, the screaming humans, the female with the knife and that strange, stubborn courage. Eventually, sleep dragged me under. I dreamed of battle again, blood, noise, the crack of bones under my club. But this time, something else lurked beneath the usual visions. A sense of searching, of reaching for something I couldn't name. Something beyond the next raid, the next kill. It felt wrong, unorky. I shoved it away and clung to the simpler joy of imagined violence. Morning hit the camp like an explosion, roaring engines, shouted orders, metal on metal. I woke stiff but fully healed. The cut on my thigh had faded to a faint line, barely noticeable against my green skin. I gathered my weapons. The club now back up, the laser gun in pride of place, and headed to where Scrayer's squad was mustering. He'd promised a harder raid, and I wanted to prove that yesterday hadn't been a fluke. The new target, he explained, was another human settlement, but this one was a mining outpost with a proper Imperial Guard garrison. Real soldiers, not just dirt farmers with tools. They got guns, Scryer said. Training, maybe armor, maybe bunkers. More risk, more reward. Good guns, good armor, good fight. This time, there was more planning than usual. Scryer split us up with clear roles. Most of us, myself included, would form the main assault, charging straight at the front gate. A smaller group under Scryer would loop around and hit the rear once the defenders were tied up dealing with us. Simple pincer, for orcs, practically genius. We rolled out in 2 battle wagons, with a pack of biker boys roaring along as mobile support to chase down anyone trying to run. The journey took longer. The outpost sat deeper in rough ground, half buried in a hillside. When we finally crested the last rise, I got my first proper look at it. Solid structures huddled behind a wall of rockcrete and metal. Guard towers at the corners, glints of weapons as sentries scanned the landscape. Dark mine entrances yawned in the rock behind, like mouths swallowing workers and spitting out ore. Whatever they were digging up was important enough for the guard to protect. Important to them meant fun for us. The main gates opened onto a flat, cleared killing ground with no cover at all. That's what we'd have to cross. I felt a spark of something almost like apprehension, but in an orc body. It just honed the senses and set muscles twitching. The knob in charge of our assault group was a scarred brute named Gragskull. Less talkative than Scryer, but just as dangerous. When I say go, you go, he told us. Run fast. Shoot if you got gun. Get to wall. Get over wall. Kill everything inside. Any questions? No one spoke. There was nothing to ask. We lined up at the edge of the tree line, ready to sprint out into open death. Scrayer's flanking group had already peeled off to circle around. The bikers rumbled along both sides, engines growling. Gragskull held up a hand, keeping us in check while he watched the towers through a pair of stolen binoculars. He was waiting for something. Then I heard it. A distant explosion behind the outpost. Scrayer's signal. Go! Gragskull roared, chopping his arm down. We went. 30 orcs charging full tilt across bare ground into a fortified Imperial position, yelling at the top of our lungs and waving guns and blades in the air. Glorious, suicidal, perfectly orky. The response came fast. Lass fire rained down from the walls and towers, red beams slashing the air. 2 boys dropped in the first volley, bodies tumbling bonelessly into the dirt. Another took a hit in the leg but refused to fall, dragging the limb as he ran, roaring in defiance. I zigzagged as I ran, trying to make myself a harder target without losing speed. The laser gun rode in my hands, useless until we closed the gap. Imperial Guard weapons outranged most of our junk, and my stolen gun was no exception. A boy just ahead of me jerked as a bolt punched through his throat, steam and blood bursting out. He crashed to the ground, and I vaulted over him without breaking stride. The wall loomed closer, then closer still. 50 meters, 40, 30. The fire thickened as the guard found their mark. More orcs fell, screaming or silent. Somewhere behind me, I heard the ragged thunder of orc shooters joining in, wild shots spraying toward the walls. Most missed, but it forced some of the defenders to duck. At about 20 meters, I raised my laser gun and squeezed the trigger, aiming roughly at a figure on the wall. The weapon bucked, sending a beam of light into the stone just below my target. Too low. I adjusted and fired again. This time, the shot drilled into a guard's shoulder, spinning him around and sending him toppling backward out of sight. A fierce joy surged through me. My first proper kill at range, less personal than caving in a skull with a club, but satisfying in its own way. I fired again and again as we closed the final stretch, not truly aiming, just adding noise and danger to the storm of shots. 10 meters. Last fire chewed the ground around my feet, hot dust spitting up with each missed shot. A beam grazed my upper arm, burning away skin in a line of fire. It only pumped more rage into my veins. 5 meters. We hit the base of the wall, half of us maybe. I didn't have the time to count. Gragskull was there, bellowing orders, turning chaos into a kind of crude plan. Some boys hurled grappling hooks with ropes, swinging them up toward the top. Others just started climbing, jamming fingers and toes into cracks in the stone. I chose to climb, slinging my laser gun over my back and hauling myself up the rough surface. The guards leaned out above, firing straight down. A boy next to me caught a shot square in the top of his skull. His head burst like rotten fruit, and his falling body nearly dragged me off the wall. I clenched my grip, found new handholds, and kept climbing. At the top, I hooked an arm over the edge and pulled myself up, straight into the face of a startled guardsman. Before he could bring his weapon to bear, I grabbed his uniform and heaved, using his own weight to flip him over the edge. His scream ended in a crunch below. Now standing on top of the wall, I unslung my laser gun and took a moment to assess the chaos. Scryer's rear attack had smashed through the back gate, and his mob was tearing through the compound. Fires burned in several buildings. Smoke, screams, and gunfire filled the air. The guard were trying to fall back in some kind of order, retreating toward a central structure, barracks, command post, whatever it was. They moved in neat lines, covering each other, laying down measured volleys. Alien behavior to an orc, that kind of discipline. Gragskull dragged himself over the wall and gathered the survivors with a barked command. "Push 'em!" he snarled, pointing at the central building. "No escape, no mercy!" We surged forward, a green flood pouring down into the outpost interior. I fired at anything in a flak vest or uniform, scoring more solid hits as I got used to the weapon's feel. The charge gauge was dropping fast, but there was no time to think about that. As we closed in on the central building, the resistance hardened. The guard had set up a rough perimeter using crates and barriers, turning them into decent firing positions. They weren't running anymore. They were making their last stand. Gragskull took a quick look and made his choice. "You lot, left," he barked at about half the boys. "Rest with me straight on. We draw fire." I ended up with the ones charging straight into the teeth of the defense. We roared and rushed the barricades, firing wildly as we ran. Last bolts and bullets hammered the guard positions, forcing some of them to duck or flinch at just the wrong moment. We hit the line like a hammer. I vaulted over a stack of crates and landed in the middle of 3 guards. I pulled the trigger and got only a dull click in response. Empty. I swung the laser gun like a club instead, smashing it into the face of the nearest trooper. Bone cracked. He went down. I dropped the spent gun and drew my backup club, its weight grounding me as I squared off against the remaining 2. They worked together, one distracting me while the other looked for an opening. For humans, they fought well, but they weren't facing just some orc. They were facing Grubskull, Veteran of 2 raids now. Killer of Humies. Bearer of a name. I feinted toward one, then turned and smashed the other in the shoulder, feeling something give way under the blow. As he fell, I charged the last guard, taking a knife to the side and barely noticing. My club hammered his ribs, then his skull, and he dropped like a sack. Around me, the same story was playing out. Orcs stormed the barricades, dragging humans into close combat. Whatever the guard had in training and technique, we made up for in size, rage, and sheer numbers. Their line buckled, then snapped. The survivors fell back into the central building and slammed the heavy metal door shut behind them. Gragskull surveyed the smoking ruins of their defenses, grin stretching across his scarred face. "Need to get inside," he growled. "Scryer, demo charge." Scryer pushed through the mob carrying a bundle of explosives, clearly stitched together by a mech with more enthusiasm than sense. He slapped it against the door and fiddled with a crude timer. "Back," he shouted, sprinting away. We scattered, ducking behind crates, rubble, or just hitting the ground. The blast was beautiful, a roaring bloom of fire and smoke, the door torn inward and hurled across the room beyond. Before the dust finished settling, we were already moving, charging through the gap into whatever waited inside. Close quarters. Desperate enemies. The best kind of fight. The last of the guards had dug in wherever they could, behind overturned tables, in doorways, crouched behind bits of machinery. They fought like they knew they were doomed, but weren't ready to lie down and die just yet. I pushed forward alongside Crunch, the silent orc who'd shared the fire with us the night before. He was different in a fight, no wild roaring or flailing like most boys. Every swing, every step was measured, efficient. Each blow was placed to kill or cripple with as little effort as possible. It was almost artistic in a brutal way. We cleared room after room, leaving nothing alive behind us. In one chamber, we found what had to be the mining operations command center. Maps and charts lined the walls. A big table in the middle held a detailed model of the area, tiny buildings and mine shafts laid out in miniature. Crunch grunted, the first sound I'd ever heard him make on purpose. He jabbed a finger at the model at a specific spot marked with a small red flag. I didn't know what it meant, but it clearly mattered to him. Before I could ask, gunfire spat from the doorway. A human officer, marked out by his fancier uniform and insignia, stood there firing a compact auto pistol at us. Bullets slammed into Crunch. One in the shoulder, then 2 more, chest and thigh. He barely reacted. He charged. The officer emptied his pistol as Crunch closed the distance, but it didn't matter. Crunch grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off his feet, studying the man's face like he was trying to understand something about it. "Filthy Xenos," the officer rasped, blood bubbling from his mouth. "The Emperor protects—" Crunch tilted his head, considering the words for a heartbeat, then simply squeezed. The man's windpipe crushed with a wet crack. The body slid down the wall when Crunch dropped him. He turned back to me, expression as unreadable as ever. Outside, the battle sounds were fading. The sharp crack of guns gave way to the whoops and bellows of victorious orcs. The outpost was ours. The humans who hadn't died fighting were being rounded up, some to be butchered for sport, others to be taken as slaves, depending on what mood Scryer was in. I stepped back into the open air. Looting was already underway. Weapons, ammo, food, tools. Anything that looked useful or interesting was being piled up and sorted. A group of boys were loading mining equipment onto a battle wagon under the watchful eye of a mech who seemed particularly fascinated by human machinery. Scryer stood with Gragskull near the blasted doorway, talking low. As I got closer, I caught a few words. "War boss will want to know." "Yeah, we tell him. Need scouts first. Make sure." They noticed me hanging nearby and cut the conversation short. Scryer looked me over, taking note of the injuries I'd picked up in the fighting. "You still alive, Grubskull?" he said. "Getting tougher." I straightened, recognizing the compliment. "Good fight, boss. Killed plenty humies." Scryer grunted. "Saw you. Not bad for new boy. But you lost your shooter." He nodded toward the club in my hand. My only weapon now. Charge ran out, I explained. Used it as a club. Broke it on a Hume helmet. Gragskull barked a laugh. Told you, Scryer. Imperial junk no good. Orky weapons better. Scryer shrugged. Sometimes true, sometimes not. Either way, Grubskull needs new Daka. He pointed to a pile of looted weapons. Take your pick. You earned it. I walked over and dug through the heap. Lots of laser guns, a few autoguns, some shotguns. But what caught my eye was something different. A bulky weapon with a drum-shaped tank and a wide muzzle. A flamer. Promethium burner. I lifted it, feeling the weight, the way it pulled at my shoulders. Heavier than a laser gun, but it felt right. The idea of enemies screaming as they burned, skin melting from their bones, stirred something deep and hungry inside me. Scryer saw my choice and nodded approval. Good weapon, scary weapon, make Humies run. Easy to kill when they're running. I slung the flamer across my back, tusks bared in a savage grin as I imagined what I'd do with it in the next raid. The journey back to camp was pure triumph. Battle wagons groaned under the weight of loot. The survivors were drunk on blood and victory. We'd lost maybe a third of our number, but that was expected. Accepted. The dead weren't mourned. They'd fallen in battle. The best death an orc could ask for. When we rolled into camp, something was different. Orcs were gathering around the war boss's compound, a knot of big tents and rough-built structures at the center of the encampment. Noise, even by orc standards, was building. Something important was happening. Scryer and Gragskull headed there at once, barking orders for us to unload the wagons and haul the best loot to present to the war boss. I helped with the work, my new flamer drawing jealous looks from other boys. Once the wagons were empty, we followed our leaders toward the crowd. The mob parted for Scryer, giving him the grudging respect due a favored nob. I stuck close to his heels, curiosity gnawing at me. At the center stood the biggest orc I had ever seen. War boss Grimto the Skull Taker was a walking mountain of muscle and scrap plate. His skin was such a dark green it was almost black. His tusks jutted from his jaw like knives. One of his eyes had been ripped out and replaced with a glowing red mechanical orb. A crackling power claw wrapped one arm. The other held a shooter so huge most orcs would have needed both hands just to lift it. Beside him hunched a smaller, twisted figure, a weird boy. Psyker. His clothes and skin were decorated with bones and teeth, charms and fetishes. His eyes were wild, unfocused, sparks of green energy occasionally crackling around his head as power built inside him, looking for a way out. Scryer stepped forward, head bowed just enough to show respect without groveling. "Successful raid, boss," he reported. "Good loot. Good kills." Grimto barely seemed to hear. His attention was on the weird boy, who swayed and muttered to himself. "Tell him what you found," the war boss growled. Scryer hesitated, glancing at the crowd. "Maybe in private, boss." Grimto's metal eye whirred as it focused on him. Now, Scryer pulled a rolled parchment from his belt. "Found Hume maps. Show big force moving this way. Many soldiers. Tanks. Big guns." A rumble went through the assembled orcs. This wasn't just another outpost or farm. The places we'd hit were just the outer edge of something bigger. If a main Imperial force was coming, that meant war beyond simple raiding. Grimto deactivated his power claw long enough to take the map. He frowned in concentration, tracing the routes with a thick finger. "How long?" he asked. Scryer shrugged. "Hard to say. Map not clear on time, but soon. Days, not weeks." The war boss handed the map to a scrawny attendant, who scampered off with it. Then Grimto turned to the weird boy, who was visibly shaking now, little arcs of green lightning crawling across his skull. "You," Grimto growled. "What do you see?" The weird boy's head snapped up. His eyes blazed bright green. When he spoke, his voice was deeper, layered, echoing like it came from far away. "War comes," he intoned. "Great war. Blood and fire. Metal giants stride the land. The sky burns green. I see a gathering, a calling. The war approaches. Silence fell. The war was more than a battle cry. It was a storm in the warp, a psychic field that rose when enough orcs came together. It made us stronger, faster, meaner. It dragged us into a shared frenzy that turned chaos into something like purpose. War as a holy act. Grimtoe's face split in a monstrous grin. The war, he repeated slowly. Been too long. Too many little fights. Time for proper war. He raised his power claw. The energy field snapped back to life with a hungry hum. Prepare, he roared. Sharpen your choppers. Load your shooters. Tune your engines. We go to war. The response shook the air. Every orc present roared, stomped, slammed weapons together. Wah, wah, wah! The chant built and built, a tidal wave of sound and raw psychic force. I couldn't help myself. I threw back my head and added my own voice, the word vibrating in my chest and bones. It resonated with something deep inside me. This was what we were made for. Not just raids, not just scraps, war. As the crowd began to break apart, running to follow the war boss's commands, Skreyer gathered his boys, me, Zit, Crunch, and the rest, into a smaller knot away from the madness. Big changes coming, he said, voice low but shaking with excitement. War, not small thing, not raid, not skirmish, proper war, many orcs, many fights, many chances to get bigger, stronger. For us newer boys, this was important. Orcs don't just grow with time. We grow with war. Each victory, each kill, each scar pushes us towards something larger. Nob, boss, maybe even war boss if Gork and Mork are smiling. What do we do, boss? Zit asked, almost bouncing. First, get ready, Skreyer said. Check weapons, fix armor, eat good, rest good, need all strength. He jabbed a finger at me. Grubskull, you know how to use that burner? I nodded, even though I'd never actually fired a flamer before. How hard could it be? Point and squeeze. Fire takes care of the rest. Skreyer squinted at me. Find Nazgrim, mech boy. He show you proper way. No good burning yourself instead of enemy. It was solid advice. I went to look for Nazgrim. I found him in his workshop. A mess of half-dismantled engines, stacked armor plates and guns in various states of disassembly. Tools were piled everywhere. Some of them I recognized. Most I didn't. Nazgrim was hunched over a massive gun, clearly meant to be mounted on a vehicle or emplacement. He looked up as I approached, grease and oil smeared across his face. Ah, gun boy, he said. Got teeth now? I shook my head. Not here for upgrade. Need help with this. I unslung the flamer and handed it over. Nazgrim took it carefully, turning it in his hands with a kind of crude reverence. Nice burner, he said. Imperial Guard issue. Good quality. Not as killy as Orc burner, but more reliable. He pointed out the key parts as he spoke. Fuel gauge here, half full, good for maybe a dozen good burns. Safety here, use it or go boom. Trigger here. Obvious. Pilot light here. Must be lit first. He walked me through the proper sequence. Light the pilot. Check the safety. Manage the fuel. Then he handed the weapon back. Practice aiming, he warned. Remember wind direction. Flame goes with wind. Stand wrong side, you cook your own face. I thanked him, genuinely glad for the explanation. I'd seen plenty of orcs kill themselves through stupidity with their own gear. One more thing, Nazgrim added as I turned to leave. Heard about the war? I nodded. Big chance for mech like me, he said, gesturing proudly to the huge gun he'd been working on. War needs big guns, needs vehicles, needs good gear, needs mechs. You stick with me in war, I make sure you get good stuff. Deal? It was an interesting offer. Mechs were valuable, but that also made them targets. In the chaos of a war, having someone to watch your back could mean better loot and a longer life. What about Skreyer? I asked. I'm in his squad. Nazgrim waved the concern away. Skreyer understands. War not like raid. Everyone mix up. New groups form, new bosses rise, old bosses fall. Everything changes. That made sense. A war broke and remade hierarchies. That was how new war bosses were born. "Deal," I said. "I watch your back. You give me best gear." Nazgrim grinned and stuck out a hand smeared with oil and maybe blood. I clasped it, a rare formal gesture among our kind. "Deal," he echoed. In the days that followed, the camp exploded in size. More orcs arrived almost hourly, drawn by the psychic pull of the forming war. Small bands like ours were joined by massive mobs, some bringing convoys of vehicles and heavy weapons. The camp spread across the landscape like a green infection. I spent my time learning the flamers' habits. At close range, it was terrifying. At anything beyond 20 meters, it was useless. The fuel tank didn't last long either, so I had to learn to conserve shots, save them for the right moment. And as Nazgrim had warned, wind mattered. I learned that lesson the hard way. An unexpected gust blew the flame back over my arm and singed my skin. It healed quickly, but the memory stayed. Scryer was rarely seen except in the company of Grimto and the other knobs, poring over maps and discussing the campaign. That left us boys to our own training, sparring, shooting, brawling. It all helped. Crunch was gone for a while, assigned to a scouting party. When he returned 5 days after the war had been declared, he brought news that rippled through the camp. They hadn't just seen more Imperial Guard. They'd seen Space Marines, Adeptus Astartes, legends even among Humies, super soldiers in power armor, armed with the best weapons the Imperium could offer. A single Marine could stand against dozens of boys. A full company was a threat even to a growing war. Grimto took the news with calm satisfaction. If anything, he seemed pleased. "Better fight," he said. "Stronger enemies make stronger orcs. When we kill Marines, everyone see how mighty we are." His confidence spread, as it always did, though I saw some of the older knobs trading uneasy looks. They'd probably faced Space Marines before. They knew what was coming, but no one dared speak doubt out loud, not with the Wa energy building like a storm. On the 7th day of preparations, Grimto called the whole war band together. Thousands of orcs filled a natural amphitheater near the camp, a sloping basin of rock and dirt. The war boss stood on a makeshift platform of wreckage and stone, towering above us all. "Tomorrow we march," he bellowed, his voice booming across the crowd. "Tomorrow we bring war to the Humies. Not small war, not raid, real war, proper Orky war." A roar of approval hit him like a wall. "They bring their best against us," Grimto went on when the noise dipped a little. "Metal men, Space Marines. They think that scares us." He laughed, a thunderous sound like boulders colliding. "We're orcs. We fear nothing. We fight anything. The bigger they are, the more fun to kill." The roar that answered him shook dust from the rocks. "Remember," he shouted, raising his power claw, the energy field bathing his face in eerie light. "We are green. Green is best. We are strongest. We are orcs. And tomorrow, we are way." The last word detonated in the crowd. "Wah, wah, wah." Every throat took it up, every fist and weapon lifted to the sky. The chant rolled over us in waves, the psychic field thickening, tightening, becoming something almost solid. I screamed it with them, lungs burning, heart pounding. The energy crackled in the air, in my blood, in my thoughts. This was what we were made for. War. This moment, this feeling, this promise of violence on a scale beyond imagination. That night, there was little sleep in the camp. Bonfires roared high, and orcs danced, fought, feasted, and boasted about the glorious kills they'd claim in the coming battle. Crude fungus brew flowed freely, turning already hot blood into a raging fire. I drank, but only a little. I wanted my head clear for what was coming. I found Nazgrim hunched over a tarp covered in weapons, making final adjustments. He greeted me with a nod, then pointed at a rough set of armor plates. For you, he said. Not fancy. Basic protection. Better than nothing. It was scavenged Imperial flak armor, hacked apart and rebuilt for orc proportions, then reinforced with extra scrap metal. It wouldn't stop a bolter round or a power weapon, but it might turn aside lesser hits, or at least keep them from crippling me. Thanks, I said, strapping on the chest plate. It fit well enough, tight enough not to shift when I moved, loose enough not to choke me. Nazgrim helped me secure the rest, then handed over a bandolier laden with fuel canisters for my flamer. Full tank in weapon, he explained. These for reload, 6 total. Make them count. I understood the gift. Fuel was precious, hoarded by anyone lucky enough to wield a burner. For Nazgrim to give me that much meant our deal was more than just talk. Tomorrow, stay close, he went on. Frontline, dangerous place for mech. You keep burner ready. Anyone gets too close to me, you cook 'em. Clear? Clear, I said. Where we fight? He jabbed a finger at a crude deployment map nearby, showing the Wa's planned attack. Here. Second wave, behind the first mad charge, but ahead of the heaviest support. Good spot, he said. See plenty action, not first to die. It was a fair compromise. The front wave would smash into the Imperial line and pay the highest price. We would follow through the cracks they opened, where killing would be richest. I spent the rest of the night checking and rechecking my gear. Flamer clean and fueled. Backup weapon, a crude axe I'd traded for, sharpened and secure at my belt. Armor fitted as best as orc hands, and mech tinkering could manage. Morning came with blaring horns and roaring engines. The Wa assembled. Thousands of orcs forming into mobs, lines, and clanking convoys. The noise was a physical thing, pounding in the chest, engines, shouted orders, metal on metal, guns test-fired into the air. Dust rose in thick clouds as vehicles rolled into position. War bikes, battle wagons, looted tanks, and rusting beasts of war whose original design no one remembered. I found Nazgrim in the chaos as he loaded gear onto a light vehicle, a technical with a mounted gun. He waved me over and pointed at the passenger side. You ride with me, he shouted over the din. Better than walking. Save energy for fighting. I climbed aboard and set my flamer where I could grab it fast. The driver was a Gretchen. Small, twitchy, and clever enough for driving, but not big enough for fighting. He glanced at me nervously, fully aware of his place at the bottom of the pecking order. Nazgrim took his place at the mounted gun, a heavy shooter he'd personally improved. More rounds, more noise, less accuracy. In a battle this big, that was exactly what we needed. The signal to move came as a massive explosion somewhere up front. Grim 2's way of saying, go. The Wa rolled out. A moving continent of green flesh and rusted iron, surging toward the Imperial line 10 kilometers away. For orcs, it was surprisingly orderly. Units kept their rough positions, faster mobs didn't sprint too far ahead, and the slowest weren't left completely behind. The woe energy held us together, thousands of chaotic minds pulled into a single, brutal purpose. As we neared the battlefield, the enemy became clear. A line of fortifications stretched between 2 ridges, blocking the easiest route forward. Guard towers, bunkers, and gun emplacements overlapped fields of fire, controlling every approach. Behind them lurked Imperial tanks. Lehman Russ battle tanks and Chimera transports, hulking shapes angled to support the defensive line. And at the center stood the Space Marines. Even from a distance, they were unmistakable. Giants in deep blue power armor, adorned with symbols I didn't recognize and instinctively hated. Perhaps 100 of them, nothing compared to our thousands, and yet each one a walking fortress, a living weapon. Their presence didn't weaken the Wa. It intensified it. Engines revved harder. Voices rose. Trigger fingers itched. The psychic storm of orc excitement climbed toward frenzy. The Imperials fired first. Artillery shells arced overhead, whistling down into our advancing ranks. Explosions tore orcs and vehicles apart, throwing bodies and scrap into the air. For every greenskin pulverized, 10 more pressed forward, barely noticing. Our own guns answered, looted artillery pieces, and orc-made big shooters belching shells and rockets. Accuracy was questionable, but enthusiasm and volume made up for it. The sky filled with smoke and streaking projectiles. The ground shook. Then we entered range of the direct fire weapons. Heavy bolters and autocannons roared from the defensive line, scything through our front ranks. Orcs were blown apart by the dozen, chunks of green flesh and armor raining down. Still we advanced. Our technical was in the second wave, waiting just behind the crest of a low hill while the first wave smashed into the line. Through a pair of scavenged binoculars, I watched orcs slam into the fortifications, die, and pile up, until their bodies formed ramps for the boys behind them. In the center, the Space Marines stood like a rock in a tide. Their bolters fired in disciplined bursts, each shot claiming a target. But even they had limits. For every orc that fell, more took his place. Slowly, inevitably, the pressure began to tell. Bunkers were overrun, walls collapsed, and breaches started to open. "Now we go!" Nazgrim shouted, banging his fist on the technical's roof. The Gretchen floored it, and we surged forward, racing with a wave of vehicles and infantry toward the weakening sections of the line. As we drew close, I saw my first Space Marine properly in battle. He stood atop a collapsed stretch of wall. His armor was scarred and blackened, but he moved like it weighed nothing. One hand gripped a bolter, firing shot after shot that exploded orcs from the inside out. In the other, a power sword carved through bodies, each swing cutting 2 or 3 boys apart. Around him, the dead piled up in a mound of green. And still, the tide rose. That was the truth of our kind against foes like this. They were better in every way that mattered to humans. Skill, training, equipment. We were better in the only way that mattered to us. There were always more of us. Our technical jolted and bounced over cratered ground and corpses. Nazgrim hosed fire from the heavy shooter, the barrel glowing hot. I braced with the flamer, waiting for the moment we'd hit the line and have to fight on foot. It came faster than expected. A rocket slammed into the ground just in front of us. The blast launched the technical into the air. The world flipped, then smashed into me. I hit the ground hard. My armor absorbed enough of the impact to keep my bones mostly intact, but the shock left my head ringing. I staggered up, searching wildly for my weapon. My flamer lay a few meters away, blessedly intact. The technical was a burning heap. The Gretchen was gone, crushed, thrown, or vaporized. I never found out which. Nazgrim clawed his way free of the wreck, one arm hanging limp, blood running down his face. "You alive?" he said, more observation than question. "Good. Still need protection." I grabbed the flamer, moved to his side, and together we limped toward the line. All around us, the battle was reaching its peak. Orcs had punched through in several places, pouring into trenches and bunkers. The clean lines of Imperial volleys had broken down into confused close-range exchanges, bayonets and chainswords flashing amid muzzle flashes and screams. We reached a section where the wall was completely gone, reduced to rubble. Orcs swarmed over it in a constant stream. Nazgrim stopped to catch his breath and squinted at the fight unfolding beyond. "Marines falling back," he muttered, pointing at a squad of the armored giants withdrawing in tight formation. "Good for us, bad for us. They're not running, regrouping. They'll counterattack soon." He was right. Even as he spoke, more Space Marines appeared from behind the second line, mounted on roaring assault bikes. They surged toward the breakthrough point, engines screaming. Behind them lumbered Centurions, walking fortresses that spat fire with every step. The orcs who'd battered their way through suddenly found themselves in a crossfire of bolter shells, plasma bursts, and heavy weapons. They didn't fall back. They roared and charged harder. "We go right," Nazgrim decided. "Away from main counterattack. Find weaker spot. Get behind them." Sound logic. I followed as we skirted the worst of the carnage. moving along the broken wall toward a section held mainly by Imperial Guard. These weren't weaklings. They fought well, but they were still human. Prey, not demigods in ceramite. We joined a mob of orcs hitting that position. I brought my flamer up and pulled the trigger for the first time in real combat. A sheet of burning promethium washed over a dug-in squad. The effect was immediate and terrible. Human shapes burst from cover, skin and cloth ablaze. Some dropped to the ground, trying to roll out the flames. Others ran, shrieking, crashing into their own comrades and spreading panic and fire alike. The sight filled me with savage joy. This was power. This was what it meant to be orc, to turn the enemy's world into screaming, burning chaos. I swept the flamer across another position. More humans became living torches. Nazgrim stayed just behind me, firing a pistol at any guard who came stumbling out, still clutching a working weapon. We worked well together, my fire driving them from cover, his shots finishing those who somehow survived. We'd pushed maybe 50 meters into the Imperial position when I saw him. Our first Space Marine at close range. He stepped out from behind a wrecked tank, armor scorched and dented but still functional. A plasma gun hummed in his hands, coils glowing with deadly light. Instinct took over. I swung the flamer toward him and unleashed a stream of promethium. Fire engulfed him. Against normal foes, that would have been the end. Against a Marine, it was an inconvenience. He kept walking, wreathed in flame, armor systems compensating. The plasma gun rose, aimed directly at me. Nazgrim slammed into my side, knocking me clear. The plasma bolt tore through the air where I'd been a heartbeat before and landed in an orc behind us. The boy vaporized from the chest up, his legs collapsing into the dirt. The Marine turned his focus to Nazgrim, perhaps recognizing a mech's value as a target. That was my chance. I circled wide and charged, slamming my full weight into him. It was like ramming a wall. He rocked back a step but didn't fall. His backhand caught me full across the chest. Pain exploded. I flew, hit the ground, armor cracking. For a moment I could barely breathe. As I staggered upright, I forced myself to think. The flamer hadn't worked. His armor was too strong, but even the best plate had weak spots. Joints, neck seals, eye lenses. I'd have to hit those. Nazgrim was retreating, firing his pistol. The rounds pinged harmlessly off the Marine's armor. The giant advanced steadily, raising the plasma gun for another shot. Nazgrim stumbled on debris and fell backward as the Marine leveled the weapon at him. I lunged again, this time aiming low. My tackle crashed into the Marine's knees. It didn't topple him, but it wrenched his aim. The plasma bolt flew wide and hit a nearby fuel drum. The explosion ripped open more of the battlefield, a mushroom of fire devouring orcs and guardsmen alike. The Marine pivoted with impossible speed for something so heavy and seized me by the throat. His grip was unbreakable, crushing my windpipe, lifting me off my feet. I clawed and kicked uselessly. My vision narrowed. The world darkened. Through that red haze, I saw Nazgrim get up and rush forward, something clutched in his good hand. He slapped it onto the Marine's backpack, his armor's power unit, then dove away. The Marine realized the danger too late. He dropped me, reaching back for the device. Before he could tear it free, it detonated. The explosion was small, but perfectly placed. His armor powered down instantly, servos freezing. The Space Marine locked rigid inside his own suit, then toppled like a felled tree, crashing to the ground. I lay there choking, sucking air back into my bruised throat. Nazgrim was already on him, prying at the neck seals with frantic focus. "Help!" he snapped. "Need to get inside. Very valuable." I understood. Space Marine armor and implants were some of the finest tech in the Imperium. For a mech, this was a prize beyond measure. I grabbed the armor and heaved, straining at the emergency releases. With a hiss, the helmet came free. The face beneath was pale, noble, twisted by pain and fury. His eyes burned, not with fear, but contempt and unbroken will. "Xenos filth," he spat, blood on his lips. "The Emperor's angels will cleanse this world of your taint. Nazgrim ignored him, already turning the helmet over, studying its systems like a priest at an altar. I stared at the Marine. It was the closest I'd ever been to one of humanity's finest warriors. Even defeated, there was no surrender in him, only hate and duty. "Kill me and be done with it," he said. "I die in service to the Emperor. You live only to spread destruction." I considered his words. There was truth in them from a certain view. Orcs existed for war, for destruction. It was our nature, our purpose. But was that really so different from him, grown, shaped, and armed for nothing but battle? "We not so different," I said slowly. The idea felt strange, almost wrong to even voice. "You fight for your god. We fight 'cause we orcs. Same result, war forever." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Then it hardened again. "We are nothing alike, Greenskin. We fight to protect humanity. You fight because you know nothing else. Stop talking to food," Nazgrim snapped without looking up. "Kill Marine, take armor, inside bits, chest piece, heart, black thing. Very valuable." He was right. This wasn't the time for talk. This was war. I reached for my axe, ready to give the Marine a quick, clean death. A warrior's end. He held my gaze without flinching. "My brothers will avenge me," he said. "The Ultramarines do not forget their fallen." The name meant nothing to me, but the conviction did. I raised the axe higher. The blow never landed. A thunderous blast shook the ground, pitching me sideways. I twisted to look and saw a massive tank cresting a rise less than 100 meters away, larger than any I'd seen so far. Its main cannon pointed straight at us. It fired again. The shell hit nearby, and the world vanished in noise and shock. Everything went black. I woke to pain and blood in my mouth. My body felt broken, heavy, sluggish. With great effort, I forced my eyes open. The sky above was choked with smoke. Weapon flashes lit it from below like lightning in storm clouds. The roar of battle had changed, no longer a constant wall of sound, but scattered, distant bursts. I tried to move and couldn't. Looking down, I saw why. A slab of rockcrete pinned my lower body, crushing it into the dirt. Blood had pooled beneath me, soaking into the ground. I was dying. The thought came with a strange clarity and no panic. Just understanding. Bodies lay all around, orc and human alike, equal in death where they never could be in life. I couldn't see Nazgrim. Maybe he'd escaped. Maybe he lay broken somewhere just out of sight. The Marine's armor stood empty where he had fallen. Whether his brothers had dragged him clear or Nazgrim had stripped the useful parts before fleeing, I couldn't tell. Far away, the battle still raged. The Wa had driven deep into Imperial lines, green tides surging around stubborn pockets of resistance. But the momentum was gone. In some places, the tide had even begun to roll back. As my vision blurred, I understood why. More Imperial reinforcements had arrived. Drop pods slammed into the battlefield, vomiting out fresh squads of space marines in different colors. New guard regiments marched from towering landers, deploying in fresh lines of steel and lass fire. The Wa was mighty, but even it had limits. I felt no despair. For an orc, victory or defeat was almost irrelevant. What mattered was the fighting, the struggle, the chance to kill, to roar, to prove yourself. I had fought, I had killed, I had grown stronger. That was enough. As the darkness crept in, my mind wandered, back to the human female from the farm, the one who died for her young. There had been meaning in her death beyond raw survival. Was there something like that in mine? Had my short, brutal life served some purpose in the endless war that devoured the galaxy? Or was that just weak, human thinking trying to creep into an orc brain at the end? Not an orky thought at all. Maybe it was blood loss. Maybe in my last moments I was glimpsing something most of my kind never bothered to see. A view of the war bigger than any one fight. The sounds of battle drifted away. The darkness thickened around the edges of my sight. One thought remained, clear and simple. I was Orc. I had lived as Orc. I died as Orc. Somewhere, my spores would seed the ground. New Orcs would grow. They would fight where I could not. The cycle would continue. Forever war, forever Orc. Green is best. The last thing I saw before my vision failed completely was a boot stepping into view beside my head. Blue, massive, a Space Marine's boot. There was a rising whine of a weapon charging, and then nothing. Nothing but darkness. Nothing but war. Nothing but the endless cycle of violence that defines the grim darkness of the far future where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods.